they needed help, and everyone remembered her for that. So it feels just like that it's not just this young life that's been lost, this really promising young life, but she was symbolic of something bigger than that. And I think it's left broken hearts all over the north of Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and further afield, obviously, than that.
Brian McQuaig, you're a campaigner and activist. Thank you for being with us tonight. Tell us a little bit. I mean, she was a very young girl, and even looking at the tape there, she was so young looking. Do you think that the younger generation, like her generation and younger than her, do you think there's an awareness of the troubles and what went on? Do you think there's enough an awareness?
Yes, absolutely. I think it is an absolute tragedy, like Angela said. I think it's a real loss to the world, and it's a real loss to journalism. Now, this is a young woman who had already won numerous awards for her work and her journalism, and she had stood up for her community at a time when it wasn't really easy to do so. And one of the works that has been widely shared on social media is a letter that she wrote to her 14-year-old self, in which she talks about being socially excluded and being bullied because she was LGBT. And I think that LGBT young people across Ireland today who read that story will be inspired by that and inspired what she went on to achieve. But I do think it's just such a tragic loss to the world that someone, such a bright light, is no longer with us.
Danielle, you mentioned to me earlier on that you went to find out about her, Lera, after you heard the news. What struck you about her?
Well, just what a bright light she seemed to be. You know, she seemed sort of like a beacon of hope, really, I think, for many people. And, you know, I have a friend from Northern Ireland, and that's how she described her. She said, you know, this was a person that meant so much for progressiveness in Northern Ireland. And yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's so sad.
Ryan, what concerns do you have about the wider picture, I suppose, and the situation there at the moment?
Well, I think that the stuff that that Lera was covering when this tragic incident happened, I think that it shows just how precarious the situation is in Northern Ireland, and with the sort of a shadow of Brexit overhanging the Northern Irish border, I think it shows the utmost respect and the careful nature in which that situation has to be handled. And it has to be said that the UK government haven't done that so far, and they have to be paying more respect to this situation and more attention to the situation in Northern Ireland.
Is that what you think it is, Angela? I mean, should we be conflating these two events, the Brexit and this awful tragedy? I mean, should we be speaking about them in the same sentence, do you think?
Yes and no. I think there's legitimate concerns that if the border problem, if there isn't a solution, a real sincere solution to this, that it could reignite tensions. But that said, you know, the group that were responsible for the murder of Lera McKee, they're a splinter group. And we've seen from the reaction that people in Derry and people further afield don't feel like they represent them. You know, they have I think, is it the new IRA or something they call themselves now? This is not the provisional IRA that was involved in the Troubles. This is a splinter group, and there has been splinter groups since the Good Friday Agreement. People who don't agree with the Good Friday Agreement and who would maybe rather see a return to violence. One of the striking things that we saw actually in Derry the day after this event happened was when DUP leader Arlene Foster went there. Now, the DUP does not have a great record when it comes to LGBT issues. It's obviously a unionist party, and it was going to this area of Derry. But when she stood up, she was applauded by the people there, because I think they thought it was very important to send the message loud and clear. People do not want a return to those days, and they can all stand on the same platform to make that clear.
Why it takes something like this for those hands to be extended. Danielle, I mean, does it take an awful tragedy like this for these kind of events to happen and for those platforms to be shared?
Gosh, I think the situation is obviously so tense in Northern Ireland. It's something that, you know, we can't really understand. We observe it, but we don't get it. We don't have this trouble here. You know, you just have to hope. You have to hope that something good, some positivity can come out of this. But we just have to wait and see. The problem, I think, was that politicians put a plaster over this situation years ago, and, you know, somebody has died now. you know, this is real, this is happening today, and somebody has died, and you have to think, how safe, how secure is that plaster? The problem is ongoing.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll be speaking about it a lot more. You can let us know your thoughts on social media if you have something to say about this or any of our stories tonight. You can use the hashtag BBC7days. You can also watch us and lots more on BBC iPlayer.
Now, dramatic images of Paris's beloved Notre Dame Cathedral being devastated by fire on Monday have captivated people around the world. The building, which is more than 850 years old, has been partially destroyed despite the efforts of firefighters. So how did the fire spread through the cathedral? We still don't know the cause, but smoke emerged from the building, which was being renovated just before 6 o'clock UK time on Monday. The fire appears to have started beneath the 315-foot spire, quickly spreading north and south along the timber roof. The blaze then travelled along the eastern section and the other way too, towards the towers. Well, our chief correspondent James Cook sent this report from Paris.
Out of despair, hope. For 9 hours, the inferno raged. But Notre Dame endures. In the darkest hour, all had seemed lost in the City of Lights. This was the moment France and the world reeled. With 19th century spire and oak roof gone, Parisians could only look on and lament. Their 12th century cathedral seemed doomed, the city weighed down by sorrow.
This is a national disaster. I'm very upset. This cathedral is 850 years old, and to see the building fall to pieces, the spire fall down, just as we were renovating it, all I can do is pray.
But the city's beloved firefighters, 500 of them, had not given up. At great risk, some entered the burning building. Their bravery was rewarded. The structure and its landmark bell towers was saved from collapse. President Macron's appeal to rebuild has already touched a chord. Donations have poured in, including millions from the richest businessmen in France. But Notre Dame de Paris, Our Lady of Paris, has suffered before. Ransacked by rioting Huguenot Protestants in the 16th century and pillaged during the French Revolution 200 years later. It was only the popularity of a Gothic novel about a hunchbacked bell ringer which led to its renaissance.
I think the whole of Paris and perhaps the whole of France and perhaps a big part of the world went to bed last night with a sense of loss, of something that was almost irretrievably gone. And as a Christian, it's our common loss.
James Cook, BBC News, Paris.
Well, within just hours, hundreds of millions of euros were pledged to help rebuild Notre Dame. But as the embers cooled, critics called for the billionaire donors to spend their cash on the poor instead. Ryan, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it was interesting watching the coverage of this story on social media because, you know, at first you saw those devastating images of the fire and the spire coming down, and then those heartwarming images of people getting together and singing, and what the initial reaction was that this was clearly a building which had significant cultural meaning to people, religious meaning to people, and historical meaning to the people of France. And then the narrative slightly shifted when details of these donors and these super wealthy families, you know, dropping 100 million euros here and 200 million euros there to pay for the rebuilding.
But sure, isn't it their money? Can't they do what they like with it?
Well, absolutely, and I'm sure they've got an army of people to tell them how to spend the money, but it's not for me to do so. But what I would say is I wish that these super wealthy families were moved to donating more often when you have, you know, widening inequality and poverty across the world.
Danielle, you looked quite visibly upset when you were watching those pictures.
Yeah.
Should the money be spent on restoring it, or do you think it should be put elsewhere?
I mean, this is one of the most iconic buildings in the world. I think, you know, it is up to how people choose to spend their money. If they want to donate, on you go, you do that. I think it should obviously be restored. It's a work of art, and watching it like that, it's so upsetting. I was watching it at work. And
Hope your boss isn't watching.
I know, yeah. And I was crying, you know, and seeing that spire fall is just horrific.
Did you, Angela, you are a Catholic. What does it mean to you, Notre Dame?
Well, I would say that Notre Dame, given its history, is as symbolic for non-Catholics as it is for Catholics in many ways. It's just, it means so many different things to different people. But this was particularly poignant for Catholics because this was at the very beginning of Holy Week, which is the most important week of the year. This is Easter week. It's the most important in the Catholic calendar. And for something like that to happen felt very symbolic. And, you know, it really did.
Of what, Angela? What would you say was
well,
symbolic?
interestingly, actually, in the same night, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is a very symbolic building in Islam, also went on fire. Now, that fire was also contained, and because Notre Dame was happening, you know, it really struggled to break through the noise of that coverage.
Cycle, yeah.
But a few people did spot it, that the fact that these two buildings had gone on, these two monumentally symbolic buildings had gone on fire in the same night, and you know, for Catholics at the beginning of Holy Week. So it did feel like there was a lot of symbolism, and there was a lot of debate about what it meant. You know, does it say something about the state of the world? Does it say something about the state of the church?
Well,
you know?
does it say something about the state of the
I
world?
was going to say, you know, why are us as a generation, why can't we look after things? Do you think there's a bit of that as well? We've got Notre Dame is burnt down. It's survived 2 world wars and a French Revolution with the Glasgow Art School burned down twice. Is there something about we're not looking after things properly? Danielle, you're nodding there.
Yeah, I think definitely we don't take better care of these beautiful monuments. I mean, the Glasgow Art School, you would think the first time it went on fire, it's time to do something here, you know? Clearly not. So yeah, we do need to take, I mean, these are beautiful, beautiful buildings. We can't lose them. It would be a shame if we were the last generation, or, you know, to have the Notre Dame in our lives, you know?
And do you think that, is it a generation thing? Are we not very good at looking after things? Have we become careless with history a bit?
I wouldn't necessarily say so until we know more about what caused the fire. I think people are saying that there was an electrical fault. I'm not sure that you can necessarily blame a generation for that. I think that an investigation has to go into what caused the fire.
Blame the millennials.
Well, that's what it sounds like they're doing.
Or social media. It's about to be one of those now.
Yeah.
I know.
We can't have nice things, obviously.
No, apparently not. OK, guys, well, do remember, there's lots more analysis of what happens next with Notre Dame on the BBC News website, isn't there, Fiona?
There is indeed. Now, also this week, saw a decision in the legal case in which the former Scottish Labour leader Kezia Dugdale had a damages case brought against her by a pro-independence blogger.
Stuart Campbell, who runs the Wings Over Scotland website, took the MSP to court after she claimed in a newspaper column that he had sent homophobic tweets. A sheriff said it was wrong to imply that Mr Campbell is homophobic, but ruled the remarks had been fair comment. Here's our political reporter, David Wallace-Lockhart.
To improve the lives of their own families.
The innocuous speech that sparked the court case. Tory MSP Oliver Mundell addressing his party's 2017 conference. Pro-independence blogger Stuart Campbell, better known as Wings Over Scotland, wasn't impressed and tweeted that Mundell was the sort of speaker that makes you wish his dad embraced his homosexuality sooner. His father, Scottish Secretary David Mundell, came out as gay in 2016. A few days later, then leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Kezia Dugdale, wrote in her Daily Record column that Wings Over Scotland had made homophobic tweets and spouted hatred and homophobia on social media. A legal battle ensued. The blogger accused the MSP of defamation and sued for £25,000. Kezia Dugdale stood by her comments. This week, the judge ruled she was wrong to imply Mr Campbell was homophobic. He had simply been making an insulting jibe at Oliver Mundell's expense. Kezia Dugdale's statements were defamatory. But She was expressing an opinion, and it fell under the legal definition of fair comment, meaning she doesn't have to pay any compensation.
I think this is a very important ruling for the freedom of speech and a healthy press. Citizens across the country, whether it's in their newspapers or in their everyday lives, should be able to freely say what they think without ending up in court. There are limits to that, and the limits are if it goes beyond what's considered fair or if what you say is in any way dishonest.
But for Stuart Campbell, the ruling makes little sense.
Mostly we're just bemused. I mean, the sheriff has found that everything we claimed was true. He's said that I was defamed, that it was untrue, that I'm not a homophobe, and he's basically let Kezia Dugdale off on the grounds that she's an idiot who doesn't know what words mean, and ignorance didn't used to be a defence in law, but apparently it now is.
This case has hung over Kezia Dugdale for around 2 years.
Come on, go. I can't find it.
There have been moments of respite, such as taking part in I'm a Celebrity in Australia in 2017, but moments of stress too. The Labour Party initially paid for her defence, but pulled funding last September. The Daily Record stepped in, but any damages to be paid to Wings Over Scotland would have come out of her own pocket. For the judge, both Kezia and Wings Over Scotland had misunderstood the impression their words might convey. He added that while we have the freedom to act unpleasantly and harmfully, some freedoms are best left to one side. David Walls-Lockhart, BBC News.
Angela, you have seen the ugly side of social media and of Twitter. What can we learn from this case, do you think?
Unfortunately, I don't think that we seem to learn at all these days when it comes to social media. I mean, that right at the end there where it was said about the judge's comments about, you have the freedom to be nasty, but maybe it'd be better if you weren't nasty. That's what we should probably be talking about rather than the ins and the outs of the legality of the case. It was all bogged down in legal content. But really, do we need to be this hostile to each other when we're having political debate? That's what it comes down to. And the aftermath of this case on social media has been just as horrible as everything that came before it. People who are supporting Kezia Dugdale are getting a hard time. People that are, it's just everywhere, and it's exhausting, it's tiring, it reflects really badly on us as a country, I think.
Why don't we just give it up? Why don't you pack it? Why don't you
Because you're in this situation where you can't. If you're in certain lines of work, like journalism, you feel like there's a great pressure to carry on using it. But me personally, I also feel like, well, why should I step aside? I'm not behaving like that towards other people, so why should I be the person that steps aside so that the trolls all get to stay? They're just pushing better people off social media, and that's not the solution to that. That's clearly not the solution to it. So my problem with Wings Over Scotland, I think, is that he doesn't really take responsibility for it. He accepts that he has a very hostile manner on social media, that he insults people, and that's just his approach. He said as much in the court case, that he has a very distinct approach to things. But he doesn't seem to think that there's very much wrong with that. And I think there's a lot wrong with it. I think there's a great problem there. If you're trying, even from a tactical perspective, he's pro-independence. If you're trying to get people on the other side over to your way of thinking, you're not going to do it by insulting them.
Well, Scottish politics on Twitter, Ryan, as you will know yourself, there's an incredible heat to, even from an Irish perspective, when you come over here, the politics on Twitter, it's extremely hot. Why is that, do you think?
I think in the last few years it has become increasingly toxic, and I think I would echo much of what Angela has just said. I have been on the receiving end of Twitter pylons and Twitter abuse, and it's not nice. But I'm somebody who supports Scottish independence, but I have to say I'm happy that the court case turned out the way it did, because we had a situation where a gay woman was being taken to court over her opinion on what was homophobic, and I think that when you are someone who is, as Angela said, uses that style of being demeaning to people on Twitter, then you have to expect, as the Sheriff said, you have to expect some of that back. What I would say is to those who, like me, who want Scottish independence, or if you're on the other side, just like Angela said, you're never going to convince people by demeaning them, ridiculing them or abusing them from an anonymous Twitter account. That's not how you're going to win the argument.
Danny, you're nodding there, and I'm very interested about your experience, because you support the Leave vote. You're also on social media. What is it like being there in a place where, and a no voter as well, in a place where people don't agree with your views. How do you deal with that? What's your experience?
To be honest with you, I've had quite a pleasant time on Twitter. I think the only time that I really have. It's amazing.
How do you do that?
How does that happen?
I have no idea. Yeah, but I think, you know, when you put up a picture of sort of you with a politician and you see the abuse that they get, and you're like, oh, this is horrible, this is horrific. So, you know, I'm lucky. Twitter's been quite generous to me, and it's a shame because social media, there is a lot of good, you know, you can meet so many wonderful people through it, and it's a shame that there are a few really bad eggs kind of spoil all the fun. And I just think try and be as friendly and nice as possible. And
I'd like to see people take more responsibility though, because what we end up is one side versus other side situation.
Black and white, isn't it? There's no sort of grey area.
Nationalists will say that it's unionists that are the worst, and unionists will say that it's nationalists that are the worst. And you can repeat that for any topic that people are talking about. We need to just accept that there are social media does this. It works in a way that kind of thrives on the division of people. And so we have to accept that it's not about who's the worst, that doesn't really solve the problem. What I think you need to do personally is think that just because someone else on the other side is behaving badly, that doesn't mean it's okay for you to do it. We learn that as kids.
Sure.
It's about taking responsibility, being the bigger person and not treating others like that. And we see too much of this, well, the other side does it. The other side says something worse. Who cares what the other side said? What are you going to say?
Well, in fair, Ryan and Danielle, you know, have not come to blows yet on the show.
Yes.
On the
Very respectful on the sofa.
very respectful, which we like to see. Well, let's stay with politics and the EU elections. It's a contest that wasn't supposed to happen. It could still be cancelled, but for now, it's on. So the plan for now is to vote for our members of the European Parliament on the 23rd of May, a Thursday. Remember, the UK government had wanted to be out of the European Union at the end of March. We're obviously not, so there has to be a vote. There are 751 members of the European Parliament, which sits in both Brussels and in Strasbourg. They kind of pass EU laws and approve its budget. There are 73 MEPs in the UK, 6 of them in Scotland. Now, 2 are currently from the SNP, 2 from Labour, 1 from the Conservatives and 1 from the Brexit Party, but he was elected as a UKIP member. Now, the new party, Change UK, is also looking to field some candidates. Now, the final date to register to take part is the 7th of May, and European Union citizens are allowed to vote. Now, it's not like a Westminster election where the winner with the most votes takes it all. A party list voting system is used. How does it work? Well, voters mark an X by their favourite party, and a pretty complicated proportional system is used to share the region's seat between parties. So in case you thought it couldn't get any more interesting, we have proportional representation to deal with as well. There'll be plenty of hard-fought campaigning with Brexit, a real key issue is expected. Turnout last time in 2014 was only 35%. Many are predicting it could be much higher this time around due to interest in Brexit and the EU. On the continent, results are announced on the Sunday, but we don't do that here in Scotland, as the Western Isles will not count on a Sunday, but we will have enough information to know the seats won by the parties on the Sunday night, with the official declaration on the Monday. So that's how things pan out. But the funny thing about this election is that it could be cancelled at any time if the Prime Minister manages to get a Brexit deal through the House of Commons. Perhaps not very likely the way things stand at the moment. Fiona.
There's no escaping from your board of pain, is there?
Never, no.
Not pepper punishment.
No, I am.
Ryan, how are you feeling about the European elections?
Oh, I'm buzzing, to be honest. I never thought I would.
So you're vibrating with excitement, right? Can't wait.
I never thought I would get to vote in an EU election again, so I'm just looking forward to it, to be honest.
I'm excited someone's excited. Yeah, that's fantastic.
But maybe the first time.
But in all seriousness, you mentioned turnout the last time. The turnout is horrendously poor at any election. But what I would say to people is, particularly young people and particularly people in Scotland who feel like they have been ignored since we voted overwhelmingly to remain within the EU, I would say get out and vote, and this time and get your voice heard, and send a message to the UK government that we won't be ignored anymore.
Danielle, are you buzzing and vibrating about the European elections?
Vibrating with anger. I'm really quite upset.
Why are you upset?
Well, you know, I'm a big Brexiteer. I really believe in the opportunities that lie outside of the EU, and, you know, having to, you know, go through these elections, it's just really, it's kind of like a kick in the teeth, really, for me. It's quite sad, you know, because we were told repeatedly that we would be leaving on the 29th of March. The 29th of March has been and gone, and we're still in the EU.
Did you have champagne in the fridge that you had to
I
throw
did.
out?
I did. That's really sad, but I did.
Still there. Angela, what do you make of where we are now? Are you excited and buzzing?
No, I'm amused, actually.
You're amused.
Amused or amused? It's just because, say, in the European elections and you have that proportional representation voting system, this is like, it's like the repeat of the Scottish independence referendum, except with the EU. We had the referendum, and then after that, well after that, it was the Scottish elections. And do you remember all of the debates people had about how to manipulate the proportional representation
formulas.
voting system? Yeah, this is about who was getting your second vote. This went on for months. It was mind-numbing. I've never seen so much detail.
Fascinated at the same time.
Yes, and now we've got it in the EU. This is what people are going to be doing in the EU elections. They were trying to figure out how to make that vote work for them. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, lads, we did this in Scotland already. We've been here before, and it's kind of funny just watching it being repeated. Thinking you're kind of looking, laughing with your mates, thinking, "Yeah, we know how this is all going to go."
And do you think there'll be a difference between England and Scotland then? Do you think they'll vote differently?
I would imagine so, just because I think there's probably different priorities for people in Scotland and England, but I wouldn't take it for granted. 62% of people voted in Scotland to remain, but that's probably not as high as we would have expected it to be. I think people thought Scotland was going to be massive Remain, you know, really overwhelming Remain, and it wasn't quite the same. The SNP's membership, it's estimated that about 1/3 of them voted to leave. So it's more complicated in Scotland. I think it's different issues that motivate people. You know, immigration was said to be a big factor for people who were living in England when they were voting. That's less so. We've got different issues with immigration in Scotland. In fact, we need it in Scotland because we have a smaller population. There's different motivating factors going on. I think sovereignty is a big one here. So the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage's party, seems to be ahead in the polls at the moment. I don't know if he would have the same appeal in Scotland, because again, I don't think he addresses those issues.
Daniela, as a Brexiteer, who will you be voting for, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm not willing to give up my Conservative membership yet. I will continue to vote for my party.
Despite the mess that we've had over Brexit in the last couple of months.
You know, like I said, I'm not willing to abandon ship yet.
Okay, briefly, Ryan, can I be as bold as to ask how you're going to vote?
I'll be voting for the SNP.
We may be discussing this again, I suspect. At some point.
We are.
And if you've got something to say about that, get in touch with us on social media using the hashtag BBC7days. You can also watch us and lots more on BBC iPlayer.
Now, it's been hard to move without bumping into climate change protesters this week. Well, if you live in central London or maybe even Edinburgh, that is, hundreds have been arrested. The police have had to draft in extra officers over the Easter week to deal with the protesters, and the protests have been organised by the group called Extinction Rebellion. They're demanding the declaration of a climate emergency. Here's some of the scenes from this week.
The older generations have failed tackling the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced.
The government have done nothing about this and have ignored this for 30 years, even though they knew about it. So I'm protesting. What else can I do?
You know, there are a number of protesters, a lot of protesters that want to make their point, and the issue we're having is that the more people that we arrest, the more people arrive.
we're 2 extreme summers away from global food shortages, so that affects Edinburgh, that affects Glasgow, that affects Scotland, that affects the whole world. So this is not an isolated issue, this is not something that can be delayed, this is something that needs to be acted upon now.
Our streets! Whose planet? Our planet! Whose future?
But it is when I see my